So some of you I know have been to Death Cafe, and really I started Death Cafe here in Prescott as a desire to live in a community surrounded by people who are not afraid of death, who aren't afraid to talk about death. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get started, but it's really important to me that death is something that we examine as an element of our culture, right? And not just like, this is what I do and I have fears, or that there's this way that we weave through the way that we meet this, so that when I'm grieving, we have a similar language, and you can meet me on the street and know that something's going on with me and not be afraid of me because I've had something horrible happen in my life or something hard happen in my life. And so a lot of my work, and I'll get into the story deeper, becomes from experiences of watching families and communities really struggle because of not feeling like their community members really know what to do. And then the big question that I ask is, when that's the environment that you live in, how does that affect your grief process, right? If you are feeling ostracized from your community, or like you can't talk about the things that are going on for you with your friends and loved ones, how does that affect your ability to really open up and do the deep work that grief is asking us to do? And so we're going to talk about that a lot in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which always takes way more clicks than I think it should. So bear with me here for a second. And then you click this button. All right. And hopefully, there we go. So, okay, I encourage you, I think that you can, once I'm screen sharing, you should have the little boxes on the side. And I like to think of you as still being able to see my face while I'm talking, just because I have gestures and you can really feel me. And just know that I keep you all also on the side of my screen so that I'm not just talking to my laptop. So part of what's really important, and it's actually a part of this presentation, is that the ways that humans interact with each other with our eyeballs and our gestures, our nodding, and our body language, I feel like it's even more important when we're in Zoom land, right? So many times I'm giving a presentation and everybody turns their video off and like goes and does other things, and it leaves me sort of like presenting in a vacuum. And so I try to just find like one or two people who are willing to keep their video on and engage with me as if we were having a conversation, so that I know that you're receiving my information well, because I can see your body language. You're leaning into your computer and you're nodding and things like that. So that helps me out a lot. And if you can keep, so maybe if you keep the little square of me, open, then that'll help you think I'm actually a real person. And if it doesn't work for you, you need to move on with your day, it's totally fine. I'll entertain myself. But anyway, okay, so this presentation, I call it lots of different things, but it's home funerals, family-centered death care, and satisfying grief, or just community death care and satisfying grief. So I live here in Prescott. I've been here for over 20 years. Prescott College graduate. I left for a little while and lived in Phoenix some, but always knew I'd come back here. I'm from New York, but I feel like I'm totally from Northern Arizona. I am currently the president of the National Home Funeral Alliance, and so a lot of what we're going to be talking about is my work there with the National Home Funeral Alliance, and more recently have started this project here in town called Arizona Community Death Care, which is the logo where you see the Ocotillo over there on the side. And that's that project is really about making sure that here in town, all of the resources that we have to have more information around how our options for death are sort of gathered in one place, so that when you need something, you know where to find it. And maybe I'll have time to open that website up and show you some of the elements of it. So this is my family, which is really, you know, I always say that this is why I do this work, and it comes from, so I'm a birth midwife. My initial work, I've been doing home births for 20 years. And about 12 years ago, I assisted at my first stillbirth by myself. So when I was in training with other midwives, I had assisted at some stillbirths. But this was the first time that I had a stillbirth. And it was my job as the midwife to really facilitate this family's experience and to be their resource in what had happened. And what I saw was that their community really didn't know how to be there for them. They were people who, you know, struggled with substance abuse already from the beginning before getting pregnant, and really just losing friends, being far away from family, and never having experienced that much sadness and loss at once, I really watched these people spiral into a really unhealthy place. And for myself, wanting to be a midwife, part of that was like, who do I want to be in community? As a midwife, I see myself as someone who facilitates transition, who's there for families and watches people grow in my community. And now here was these folks who were going through this humongous transition, not in the way that they expected to. And I had zero skills to help them. My midwifery education, I knew what to do from a health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, to make sure that the baby got out of the body healthfully for the mother. I knew legally what we needed to do as far as, taking care of the baby's body and paperwork and things like that. But I did not know how to facilitate a satisfying grief experience for this family and for their community, because their community was grieving as well. They were expecting a new life, and now they have sad friends and a hole. Right. And so I felt like what I really wanted was to know how to bring these people all together. Not that I would fix it, not that it would be about me, but that there was a role for a facilitator there. And I felt like I fell down. And so then that scared me, because I thought, oh my gosh, do you see these children of mine? My 4 kids are amazing. And I had to come to grips with the fact that one of my children could die, and that maybe my community wouldn't know how to hold me either when I needed to fall down and completely come apart at the possibility of losing my children or at the possibility of losing my husband. And so I realized that to be a midwife, that there were skills that I needed to acquire to be who I wanted to be in community and in my role as a midwife. And also as a mother, that if I was gonna dare to love as wholly and fully and deeply as I am capable of loving as a mother and as a wife, that I needed to actually do some end of life work, because otherwise it wasn't safe to love as much as I love without knowing that somebody could hold that other end, that I had a community that was really cultivated to do that work. So that's really how I got started, was I joke a lot. Some of you, Barbara, you've probably heard me say this at Death Cafe. It's like, partly I do this work selfishly, because I know that I live in a reality where the things I love the most could be taken from me. And so selfishly, I need to pave the way to know that I'll be held when I fall down, or if I fall down. So that's why I do this work. Really, it's about the types of communities that we want to live in. And so the National Home Funeral Alliance was started by a woman named Elizabeth Knox, and this is her daughter, Jessica. And Jessica was killed when she was 7 years old in a very minor fender bender car crash. And the airbag came up open and knocked her. And she was, in a vegetative state for a few weeks before her family had to pull the plug, and then she died. And Elizabeth was part of a Waldorf community where the practice really was to bring the child's body home, bring the loved one's body home, and care for the body at home on their own, and really create beauty and community around that together. Well, the hospital told her no, that she couldn't pick up her baby's body, her daughter's body, and bring it home from the hospital on her own. And she knew her rights. Legally, it's absolutely legal to bring a body home from the hospital. And I'll talk about that really in depth as we move on through the presentation. She knew that it was her legal right. And rather than being able to just go into grieving her daughter, she was left to advocate for herself. And so I always talk about the difference between the head and the body, right? And all of our emotion work happens inside of our bodies. It happens really down deep, rooted in the flesh of who we are. And all that advocacy work, all of that thinking, right? All of that deciding what to do and leveraging, that happens in our heads. And it's really hard to be in your head and in your body at the same time. And so this mama who needed to be down in her grief was pulled out and had to be an advocate for herself. Really tragic. Because what she needed was to spend time with. She said, "You mean to tell me I grew my daughter in my body? I cared for her every single day of her life. I made every meal. I gave her her baths. I taught her to read. And now that she's dead, you're worried that I cannot care for her? Her care is no longer my concern? And the hospital's like, well, yeah, we just really don't have a policy for that. She was able to find a friendly funeral director who was willing to pick up the body from the hospital and drop it off at her house. And really what she ended up having was a multi-day, kind of like a wake or a vigil at her home. The child's first grade friends were able to come to the house and see their friend's body laid out beautifully in a room with silks and candles and artwork. And downstairs, there was almost like a little gathering where the children could play, and then they could go upstairs into Jessica's room and see her body being there. And it was a space of joy and healing and tears, and all of the emotions had time to come out. It wasn't like you've got an hour and then the funeral director's coming, or she's dead, quick, call the funeral home, they're coming to get her body. There was time for beauty and pain and anger and all of those things to be in the room. There was space for the children and the elders and all of the people to take part in making beauty and meaning around this child's death. And again, a big part of why Elizabeth Knox, the mama, started the National Home Funeral Alliance was because she realized that she did not want a lack of understanding of families' rights on the part of a hospital or a care home or a medical examiner to impede a family from being able to have this super healing experience of spending time with the body of their loved one after death. So that's kind of the work that I carry on, both. So it's about the types of communities that we want to live in, but it can't just be about the parts that feel good. It's also about how do we talk to our local hospitals and make sure that their policies are in line with what we want access to. How do we make sure that the funeral homes in our neighborhood are willing to work with us and make sure that we have the after-death experiences that we want? How do we have relationships with our local coroner and medical examiner and make sure that they're willing to work with us and do autopsies quickly when there's a tragic death so that we can bring the body home to spend the time with it that we need to? And I'm going to get a lot more into why it's important to spend time with bodies and how to spend time with bodies. But this is really the groundwork that I'm talking about. What we're doing is we're working with our community to make sure that where we live is a good place to die. And that's Beth there, leaning over the body of her friend. So there is a comfort and a healing that comes from physically caring for the dead and from spending quiet, private time in the presence of death. It is a tremendous help in the bereavement process and helps you see death as a natural part of the cycle of life. So that's a quote from Elizabeth Knox, my friend who lost her daughter, many years ago at this point. But and this is what she understood that made her know that she needed to do this work to make sure that families know that they can spend time with their loved ones after death. Okay. So my Macaulay Culkin moment, right? Why would I ever want to spend time with dead bodies? And so, and I say it that way because I want it to just feel really normal. There's so many ways that people talk about home funerals, right? You can have a home funeral, which actually is a funeral, and people come to your home and see the body. The home funeral can just mean that you spend a few more extra hours with the body after the death. But the question is, like, why the heck would I want to do that? When my grandma was dying and I told my mom that I wanted to, this was back in New York, that I wanted to bring her body home from the hospital to my mom's house, she was like, you want to do what in my house? Like, we're going to bring a dead body into the house? That's just weird. That's just crazy, right? It was this total like Macaulay Culkin moment, right? Of like, why would I ever do that? And so part of why, these are the reasons that you would do that, right? The grief moment and the honoring is family led. There's nobody there telling you what you can do, how you can do it. And when you are empowered that way, that the fact of it being family led, jumping down to the bottom, it's satisfying and it's comforting. It files memories of being capable, of being empowered, of having something to offer, alongside these memories of tragic loss. Partly why you would ever want to do it is because it's legal. You would do it because you can, right? There's so many ways that we hand over our agency to perceived authority because we think maybe it's convenient, and we don't realize what we're missing out on. So taking care of your loved one's body at home is legal, and I'll get into that really clearly. It's eco-conscious, right? Most of the time when you take care of your loved one's body at home, there's no embalming. We use more simple caskets and whatnot to bury the body in. Oftentimes we use shrouds and things like that. So those two go together. It's eco-conscious and it's cost-conscious. Right now they say that the average funeral in this country is about $8,000 to $10,000. And if you do most of the body care on your own, you could be saving thousands of dollars. It makes meaning. Many of the people that I talk to that do this, thinking like, oh, one weird person in their family thought it was a good idea and everybody else is like, this is nuts, but we're going along with what they thought. They are blown away, saying that they've never had an experience that's so profound as when they took the time to slowly and lovingly care for the body of their loved one after death. So these are what a home funeral can be. A home funeral is a really general term that a group of people came together and decided that that's what we're going to call it. And that's why you'll see I sometimes tongue-in-cheek call it spending time with bodies or hanging out with dead bodies, because that's really what it's about, right? There's all these different things it can be, but really it's about time. It's about slowness and it's about time. So the home funeral can include caring for the loved one at home or at your church or anywhere else. Right? It's the place where they die. And then you can either bring them where you want them to go, or you can leave them right where they are if they're at a care home or at the hospital, and just making more time to actually give some physical care to the body of the person who has died. It can include bathing the body, anointing the body with oil, essential oils, different lotions and flowers and things like that. And then also dressing the body in the clothing that was chosen by the family or by that person that they wanted to be buried in or cremated in. So it's a little hard to dress a body if you've never done it before, but it's not much harder than dressing like a squirming newborn baby. When you're trying to get the arm through and how do you hold their head up and stuff like that. It's a different kind of challenge than the squirming baby, but it's a little bit awkward, but you can definitely do it. And I'll tell some stories about that too. It can include professionals if you want. So a lot of times we talk about home funerals as you don't have to hire a funeral director. In Arizona, you can do everything on your own if you really want to, and never hire a funeral director, ever. Now, if you want to get cremated, you have to hire a funeral director for the cremation. If you want to be in a cemetery that's owned by a funeral home, you have to hire that cemetery for the burial. So you can pick and choose which elements you'd like to hire the funeral director for. You can include death doulas as professionals, or moving company, like body transport companies if you want to. There's all kinds of people that you can hire if you want to. But what's important is that you understand that you are completely capable of taking care of your loved one's body and preparing them for their final resting place all on your own. You can prepare the body for a viewing or a vigil at your home or at church. So some people will keep the body at home for a few days and then decide that they want to have a bigger funeral service at their church, for example. You can transport the body from your home where the body's been kept for a few days and maybe had intimate time with just family, and bring the body over to the church for a bigger funeral service. You can have a funeral service at your home. You can decide that this is just the 5 of us, right? I don't need all the other friends involved and things like that, but it's just a small private viewing at home. So anything that you want to do is what you get to do. And I think that that's really important. Nobody's trying to sell you a package or push a specific way that it should be done. I said that you can have a gathering at your home or anywhere else. You can file all of the paperwork on your own. So if this is really like, I'm empowered, I'm a DIY person, I'm doing this all by myself, where I can't afford to pay a funeral director $150 to fill out the paperwork, you can file the death certificate on your own at the Office of Vital Records, and that is absolutely fine for you to do. There are some online electronic death records that you might need to work with, and there's phone numbers and things like that that I'll share with you later about how you can actually interact with that side of it, the medical legal side of it, and what the requirements are. You can legally transport a body on your own within the state of Arizona. And I'll tell you a little bit real quickly about what that's like. So if somebody dies in the hospital, technically, all you need is a human remains release form. The hospital releases the body to you. You drive it to where you want it to go. And you only need very specific paperwork if you are driving the body to its final resting place. Let's say the body dies at my house, but I want to have the funeral over at my mother-in-law's house. I can throw that body in my car and drive it, and I don't need any paperwork at all. A cop pulls you over and you say, yep, I own this body. It's actually, once a body dies, they become property. There's no health law or any codes around body. If you are next of kin, you own that body and you can drive it from place to place. That release form just releases the hospital from liability if you do something weird or horrible or don't file your death certificate or illegal things like that. You can build the casket, you can paint a cardboard box, you can make a shroud, all of those things you can do on your own. So that's your list. When I say home funeral, I mean all of these things. I had a guy once who thought of himself as having had a home funeral, and really all he wanted to do was, it was really important to him that he built the casket for his father once he died. And so it wasn't so much to him about spending time with the body. It was about getting the time to get that work done of doing that woodwork and making sure that he had made this beautiful casket to honor his father. And just here's an example from a home funeral that, I don't know Sarah Cruz, who knows Sarah Cruz? From old time Prescott? No. Anyway, she moved to Kansas. She was a dear friend here who she and I got in this work together. And this is from a home funeral that she did recently in Kansas. And it was actually all the condolence cards that the family had received. They cut them all up and made this mosaic. And it was the top to the cardboard cremation container. And then when it was time to cremate her husband, she said, I can't let the beautiful top go away. And so now this sits on top of her mantle as a piece of art. Here are some other just great photographs of children being involved, families working together, the guys over there building the casket. All of these things are things that you can totally do. And we've been doing it forever. So when my grandmother was dying, she said, Dani, you think you invented this? She said, I remember when I was young and my uncle she said her head was barely to the height of the top of the kitchen table, but she remembered her uncle's body in New York City, very Jewish family, but her uncle's body was laid out on the kitchen table for a few days until they could bury him. And I think it's really important that we keep coming back to this. This is not new. This is not crazy. What actually was crazy was that we hit this period of time where we decided that we were going to, like, out in the name of convenience, we were going to hire people to do all the hard things for us, right? Like birth was going to happen in this closed door room in the hospital, and you were going to go in looking pretty, right? And come out with this like clean baby looking pretty, and nobody had to know what the horrors were that went on back there, right? And the same thing sort of happens with death right now. Somebody dies and they get whisked away and they get made pretty. And the idea is that, like, we are either entitled not to see or are assumed to be not capable of handling these things that are a little bit hard or that sometimes are a little bit messy. But we never asked ourselves in those moments, what are we missing by handing over this good hard work to other people who have the best intentions, right? And so now I think what we're seeing is our society really struggling because of some of these things were removed from our sight. But we've been doing this work for a very long time. We've been doing this work for as long as we've been human. History of the funeral movement really started with good old Abraham Lincoln, and you might know the story of him being on the train ride around the country, and people were able to pay their respects for him. He was the first high-profile embalming in our country. It was during the time of germ theory, and people were really starting to like look at surgery as a more viable thing that you could actually survive. And people were dying in the South in the Civil War and wanting to be shipped up north to be buried near their families. And so embalming really became in vogue. It became a sign of affluence. And from then on, it's sort of very similar to cesarean birth in this country that became something that wasn't always, sometimes very necessary, not always necessary, but became sort of a status symbol. And at that time, and since then, the funeral industry has become a $20 billion industry in this country. But this is what it can look like. This is a family, you know, whose their mother, grandmother had died at home, and they decided to keep the body at home and care for it, just like here, just like they used to do, you know. Home funerals are legal. Crazy to think that nobody knows that, but it's completely legal to take care of a body on your own. They are legal in every state and province, both here and in Canada. Only 9 states require a funeral director for signing the death certificate or for transportation, and you can see them there on the bottom. It's Connecticut, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Louisiana. I think Michigan actually doesn't anymore. Nebraska, New Jersey, New York. So in those states, you can still have a home funeral. You just need to hire a funeral director either to bring the body there for you and to file any paperwork. So that was like when my grandmother died in New York, and I have some photographs of that later. She died in the hospital in New York. So my family wasn't able to transport the body home from the hospital on our own. We had to pay a funeral home to do that for us, because in New York, you can't drive a body the way that you can here in Arizona. But then it was fine. The funeral home came, they were super respectful of us. I had let them know a few months ahead of time that that was something we might want to do, and they said, no problem. You're gonna pay me for it, right? I paid them for it. They brought the body of my grandmother home. We spent our time with her, and then they came and picked her up and took her to the cemetery where we had a graveside service, and she was buried. Embalming is not required by law in any state. How many of you thought embalming was ever required by law? There's actually no statute anywhere in any state that requires embalming. In fact, they can't require embalming because it goes against many religious practices to embalm bodies. So they're always, some states will say refrigeration or embalming is required by 24 hours. So there always has to be a alternative to embalming. And I won't go into this really deeply, but for those of you that really like the meat of it, these are the Arizona Revised Statutes. So in Arizona, the word statute basically means a law, okay? And so if you're wanting to look at these on your own, Title 32 and Title 36 are the only places in our laws that refer to regulating of funerals at all. And what you'll see is that Title 32 is actually all in occupations. So it's actually, everything you read there is governing the practice of funeral directors. It doesn't pertain to families at all. Families and what they do with bodies has almost zero regulation, technically. What ends up happening is our institutions try to police what we're able to do. Like if you go to the hospital today in Prescott, and you want to pick up the body of the loved one, they tell you you need to file the death certificate first. I've done enough work with them that now they know that you can legally pick up the body on your own, but they still want you to file the death certificate first, which is not in accordance with the law. The law says that they need to give you a human remains release form, and then you have a week to fill out the death certificate. That's the law, but the hospital doesn't honor that. They are uncomfortable, they're worried about liability, and so they don't want to let you leave with the body unless you have filed the death certificate. I'm still working on that. And I can talk more about why that doesn't seem like it'd be a big deal, but there's some reasons why that's a big deal. Part of it has to do with what if you need some time deciding where you're going to bury the body, and you haven't decided on a cemetery yet. That means that you can't bring the body home and think about it for a few days, even though you have time. You have to have made all of those decisions before you can leave the hospital. And if it's a tragic death and you weren't prepared, you might need more time than that. You might not want to go in your head and make those choices first. You might go, you know what? I need to be in my body. I need to go home with this person that I love. My husband just died. I need to bring him home. I need to cry for 2 days, and then I'll start thinking about where I'm going to bury him. And the hospital is not following the law, making more hoops for us to jump through and making it more complicated. So this is just, to me, I love this stuff, and I just think it's super interesting. Okay, so Title 32 is all about the ways that the funeral home is regulated. And I'm going to just pause right here. Does anybody have any questions about what's up on the screen? Because I don't want to read it word for word, but I'm assuming that as I'm rambling, you're reading through it yourself. So feel free to unmute yourself right now if you have a question about anything related to funeral directors and their laws and the way that their laws are not necessarily, they don't pertain to the family. Nothing at this point? Oh,
Dani, hi. I do have a question. I know throughout much of Arizona, with all sorts of regulations, different counties follow different procedures. So are there local county or local jurisdiction statutes that impact this?
that's a great question. So again, there's like two answers, right? So the answer is no. There are no local laws that have to do with these things. The things that local laws will touch is like from county by county or incorporated city to just county land. There are some rules about who can bury in their backyard and what the regulations are for backyard burial. But as far as hospitals being released from bodies being released from hospitals or families being allowed to fill out their own death certificates, those are state laws. And so counties can't make their own laws. But what you'll see is that really from hospital to hospital or vital records office to vital records office, their understanding of those rights can be really different. And so the person that you interact with plays a bigger role on what you end up being able to do than what the law actually says. Which takes me back to that beginning of my presentation, which is that that you really need to do the work now of understanding and educating the people who are in these perceived positions of power. Because if our hospital doesn't know that they can release a body to the family, then we're back in the same situation that Elizabeth Knox was in, where somebody's died and now we're fighting for our rights. Yeah. Anything else in this section here? Here's Title 36, and this is vital records. 32 is the occupation of funeral directing. Title 36 is vital records laws. There is nothing in health department law, I've scoured it, nothing that talks about how bodies need to be disposed of, when they need to be disposed, how they need to be held before they're disposed, nothing. A little bit in funeral directors, which basically just means that a funeral director can't if you're paying a funeral director, they can't let your loved ones' bodies rot. They have some laws governing their practice that holds them to a specific standard that don't necessarily translate to families. Now, obviously, we want to follow best practices, right? You still can't dispose of a body in the open in the national forest because those are national forest laws about what can happen there. But the point is, and what's really important is that we understand what our rights are and then we act accordingly to those. So Title 36 is about what, what vital records requires. Okay, there we go. Home funerals are safe. This is really important. They are safe for caregivers and for the deceased. Nobody's going to get hurt by a home funeral. According to the Centers for Disease Control, a dead body does not pose an increased health risk. If there was plague, if there was Ebola, those are really the only situations where a dead body might pose an increased health risk. And that word increased is really important. So if somebody dies of HIV, whatever universal precautions you were practicing when you were caring for the body as it was dying are the precautions that you want to use after somebody has died. I always say, if you'd have unprotected sex with this person, or if this is someone, if it's your child and it's someone's butt you'd wipe without a glove, then there's nothing that would go on in their dead body that would make you need to use extra universal precautions, unless they had HIV, or hepatitis. Those are things that could, but if this was a person that you interacted with in life, there's no increased risk in death. Whereas something like Ebola or plague, the risk actually gets greater after the body has died. And I'll say this too, we're learning a lot now with COVID. And it's very similar with COVID. So because COVID is mostly spread through respiratory droplets, the risk of spreading it goes down because there's no more respirating, there's no more breathing. We do just still recommend that a mask is put on the person's face who has died, just because sometimes there are droplets that are still in the mouth, or, you know, and you wipe the body down to make sure that, you know, if there's any virus on the skin because they were coughing or something like that, that you clean it up. But still, if this is a person that you had been caring for as they were dying, it's okay to continue to care for them after death. And, you know, we're doing the National Home Funeral Alliance is doing a talk towards the end of August, going into this really more in depth. But one of the things that I want to bring up is that if people are dying alone in the hospital, and maybe there's a situation where you're not able to be at your loved one's side when they die, and that can be really traumatic for a lot of people who are facing end of life and their loved one is in the hospital. Having a home funeral and getting to take care of that body on your own might be that healing time for what you didn't get to do while they were alive. Then you get to give that care. And so it's really important that hospitals understand that families can still act as their own funeral director. That's what the law is, that, you know, we can act as our own funeral directors and take the body from the hospital, even though it maybe died of COVID, and then just do a really good job of using those universal precautions, keeping the body masked, wiping it down, and just staying safe. We keep the body cool with ice or air conditioning. I just use gel packs to keep the body, you know, to slow the decomposition. There's no need for embalming or disinfecting. The cleaning is really more ritual. When we talk about washing the body, it's more of a ritual cleansing. It's a way of giving love, you know, removing any waste or drool or things like that, just to make it more pleasant to be around. But there's no need to disinfect the body. And like we talked about earlier, you use universal precautions when necessary. So if this is a person you would have handled with gloves when they were sick, handle them with gloves when they're dead. If this is a person that you would have touched their skin, wiped their mouth, whatever, you can still do that after they've died. Okay, and there's a great photo of a family doing that. With proper care, fluids and odors, if present, are managed easily. Sometimes when you're handling a body, they might drool a little bit, or a little stool might come out and things like that. All things that if you are a caregiver, you can still handle. Or even if you haven't been their caregiver, that you can still handle. I'm not saying it's all peaches and roses, but they're all things that can be managed really easily. You wash with soap and water if there is a mess. The body can be anointed with essential oils if desired. And that is, you know, that's an ancient practice of bringing smells into the room, because death sometimes smells a little, it's not as bad as you might think, but you know, it's a sick smell sometimes. Just like in the hospital, there's a sourness to it when somebody's been in the hospital for a long time. Sometimes it's there and you just want to freshen it up with maybe some brighter essential oils. And also some essential oils will help slow the decomposition process by being somewhat antimicrobial. Also, what's really important is that those essential oils can be really soothing to the living. So if you think about washing the body with lavender scented water, not only is it somewhat antimicrobial and washing the body, but it's also soothing the hearts of the people who are grieving in the room. You can cool the body with dry ice, which is, it's a skill. I choose not to use dry ice because I've heard too many bodies solid using dry ice, or you get the gory off-gassing and things like that you want to avoid because you're not trying to create a Halloween scene. There are these great gel packs called Techni Ice that are these thin sheets that you activate with water, and you can cut them into strips and things like that, and they're a really great resource. When my grandmother died, we weren't really expecting it, and my mom had frozen water bottles in her freezer. And I just pulled my mom's frozen water bottles out of the freezer because, you know, she liked to drink cold water. And I just took my mom's frozen water bottles and we mostly packed them around my grandma's abdomen and a little spot where she had like a bed sore on her arm. And then other than that, we didn't need much at all. It was very, very low tech. You can dress the body and transfer it from room to room or from home to home. And again, dressing it, sometimes we cut the shirt up the back. There's a local story that's gone around, and I won't name names just in case, but a dear friend who died, and the friends got him into his spandex bike shorts because he wanted to go in his spandex bike shorts. And so, you know, the man's wife and her friends all wrestled him into his spandies. So it can be done. I'm sure there was lots of giggles. And that's what's great about a home funeral, is that there's room for all of those emotions. You can be sad that he's gone, and then you can be laughing hysterical with your friends as you're trying to squeeze him into his spandex bike shorts. Let's see. Home funerals are healing. I love that image there of the kids. So there's so much that can be going on in the house at the same time, right? These kids are outside on the patio coloring the casket. Maybe they want to be in the room. Maybe they don't want to be in the room. But it's really great for everybody to have a job. There's more time and flexibility for everything that might come up. There's room for a natural flow of events and emotions. So when my grandmother died, she was a challenging person. And there were people who needed to scream and yell at her a little bit, and for the one last time get some of those really hard emotions out. There was time for that. If we had just stayed at the hospital with my grandmother, they were telling us that they were going to give us 45 minutes with her body, and then they needed the room. 45 minutes was not enough time for 3 daughters who had been emotionally abused by this woman and 6 grandchildren, all to have their time to say goodbye in the various ways that we needed to say goodbye. So the fact that we were able to bring grandma's body home for 48 hours and interact with her body, I could be with her and laughing and crying. Then I could be with her angry. Then I could be with her sad, you know, and there was time for all of my emotions to come through in a very tangible way with her present. It normalizes and diminishes fear. Fear about death. My mom is probably one of the more death-phobic people that I've known. And getting to see her interact with her mother's body made a small shift in her relationship to even her own death. My children were there. My nephews were there. You know, my kids, they're used to me. I talk about this stuff all the time. There's a lot of death talk in my house, but not so for my nephews. So I wasn't sure how they were going to react. They're a similar age. When my grandma died, they were 4 and 6, I think. No, something like that. Anyway, and they were fine. They took their cues from the adults. The adults were sad, but they weren't freaking out. There was nothing scary that was going on. And these kids were able to say, okay, my people are okay. My adults are okay. It must be okay to be around death. And I got to see them, and I have some photos I'll show you in a bit. I got to see them have a really healthy interaction with death and with my grandmother's body. Teaches children about the life cycle. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's time to integrate the grief and the loss. And so here's what happens. If somebody dies, and then within the hour, their body is gone, you're left alone with this new reality. It's like your brain isn't made to understand things fully in the abstract. We need to understand with some concrete interaction with the new truth. And so if the new truth is that somebody has died, it's really hard for our brain not to just think they've gone to the grocery store or are away on vacation if they're gone so quickly. And so, especially if it wasn't expected, if it's not something that you've been building up to for months, our bodies, our brain body, needs some time with the new reality in the concrete to integrate, to really weave the new reality into the fabric of who we are. And having the body there for a longer amount of time, what it lets you do is do something normal, go wash the dishes, come back in and be with the body, sit with that person, sing to them, hold their hand, tell them you're going to miss them, cry with them right there. They're not all the way gone yet. And then go walk the dog. And then come back in. And so it's like normal, new reality. Walk the dog, be with the dead person. And we slowly integrate our grief and loss, rather than what can end up happening when the body's just gone is we're sort of pummeling ourselves. Why aren't I feeling? I need to cry. Why aren't I crying? Or I'm crying so much and I can't get a break because I don't know when it's okay to stop. But if you know the person's there, you can stop for a little bit and go for that walk and come back. So it gives you a natural container for processing your grief and loss. This is my favorite part. It gives people a chance to be useful. So when I think about that body leaving so quickly, and maybe the funeral's in 3 days, what do you do for 3 days if your husband just died, or your mother just died, or your child just died? They were here, they're gone, they died, their body is gone, and now you have 3 days to basically twiddle your thumbs and wait to be told that you can now go to this other place and have your prescribed grieving time. When the body is present, there's work to do. There's caskets to be made, there's washing, there's hands to hold, there's, talking to their face, there's actual jobs that you can do. And studies show that when we feel useful, we have less chance of a post-traumatic stress response. That if we feel useful when something hard has happened, that we actually can experience post-traumatic growth. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. It gives us time to find meaning. Sometimes the meaning is that there's no meaning. It gives us time to be like, this is all crap. This is horrible. This sucks, and I'm just mad. And to really sit with that and be sure that that's the truth. Or sometimes with a mama who's lost a baby, the meaning is that now I have all this milk, I can give it to other families. Now I know what to do. It gives us time to be with all the different ways we might meet this. And there's my grandma. And that's my nephew, Austin, who I think I'm gonna guess was about 4 at the time. He had never been around anything dead but his dog who had died. And that's my grandma. She had probably been dead for maybe 6 hours at this time. We had moved her from the hospital home to, this is the bed that she slept in at my mother's house. And we really let the kids know that they could be wherever they wanted to be, that they could be in the room with her body as much as they wanted. If they didn't want to be in there at all, that was totally, completely fine. And this little guy, Austin, wanted to be with me. And he wanted to be with her. He didn't necessarily want to be with her alone, but he went outside and picked a basket. This is completely without being prompted. Picked a basket of flower petals. My dad has an amazing garden outside. And we made like little flower mandalas all over her face. It was like he wanted to be that up close to her, but he needed something to do. And so he made patterns with flowers on her face. And it's one of my favorite memories of all of my memories of being alive, is spending time with my grandma's body, with this youngest member of our family. And that's my daughter. She was probably 7. And my grandma had, you might have seen like a little liver spot on her face, a little sunspot. And my daughter was convinced that we needed to wash it off. So she spent so long with a washcloth just trying to wash the stuff off of her face. And was just sad and happy and useful and connected. And this was me and her having some time together with her grandmother. Oh, and this one. So this is my son, Jalen, here on the right. I guess it's the right of your screen too. I'm not sure how it switched, but anyway, the boy, that's my son. And this was the moment that I was the most shocked and surprised by. So at this time, my son, Jalen, was having some hard times. He was 17 years old. He was getting in trouble. I had just sent him to a wilderness therapy program because he was really making hard decisions, really bad decisions, actually. And he came to New York when my grandma died to be there with our family. Getting to see my 17-year-old son step up and do that archetypal man work of carrying the body, I think that's still the moment that brings me to tears the most, was seeing him step up and take his role in our family and do the job, and see him have pride that, like, I get to bear this weight. I have a purpose here. It would have been so different if, I don't know that he would have flown across the country to like attend a funeral, with 100 people that he didn't know. But the fact that he knew that he could come across the country and spend time with our small family and grandma's body, and he had a job to do. He still thinks of it as an empowering moment where he went from being a young man to being a little bit closer to being a man. And I think that that's what death offers us if we participate. This is the graveside. There's the Orthodox rabbi there in the back. And what had happened was basically we spent so much time caring for my grandmother that when it was time to bury her body, we wouldn't leave. They said usually, you know, in the Jewish tradition, everybody throws a handful of dirt on, and then they leave and the backhoe comes and fills the grave. But we were there for a couple of hours because we were like, this is our job. Like, nobody else is going to take care of my grandma. And so we all took turns with the shovel. That's my son Wilder there digging, and my daughter Cody throwing flowers on top when we were finally done. But we stuck it out to the end, and it's now a great memory that we all have. This is a woman who was hard. You know, she didn't like bring people together in the way that like some grandmas do. We loved her. We kind of worshiped her. She was an amazing woman. She was friends with Andy Warhol, and just was an amazing beauty. She looked like Marilyn Monroe in her early days. And she held us to a pretty high standard that was hard to meet. So her passing was freeing of a lot of like, now I don't have to live up to her expectations anymore, and anger and care. And the fact that we got to move our bodies and be with all of those emotions and have the time and come together on some really important, now we tell stories about being on the graveside, you know, and being barefoot in the dirt, you know, digging and filling her grave up. We have pride in what we've done, and it was a really great experience for all of us. This is a podcast. I'm skipping around a little bit because of whatever comes up on the slides, what I'm going to talk about. So the National Home Funeral Alliance just put out a podcast called A Path Home. And it just wrapped up its first season. And you can hear on there an interview that the host, Sarah Cruz, who's an old-time Prescott woman, did with my family. So she interviewed me, my mother, my aunt, and my cousin about my grandmother's home funeral. And there's basically what this podcast is just a compilation of stories of home funerals that have happened and just the impact that they've had on families. It's very easy to listen to conversations. Those of you who maybe know Rita Cantu in town, she did a home funeral back at the old coffee roasters. She brought her husband Al's body to the back of coffee roasters because that's where he used to hang out every day. There's a great interview with Rita Cantu on here as well. And I love it because people who think that I'm crazy to bring up home funerals listen to this podcast and they hear very average people talking about their experiences and really seeing the impact that it made on their experiences of death. So I highly recommend, if you're a podcast person, that you check it out. So, what is satisfying grief and how can I get some? We're going to talk a little bit about what grief is, and then I'm hopefully going to kind of converge the two ideas. So this is what home funerals are, this is what grief is, and why are they so important together, right? This, to me, if anybody's living a human existence, one of the most important concepts for you to grasp, because if I say to you, what is grief? Mostly people say sadness, and that's not enough. The word sadness is not complex enough for what grief really is, what grief feels like, and what grief looks like. So rather than thinking about grief as a feeling, I really want to encourage people to think about grief as a time period. Okay, so essentially, grief is what we think and feel inside after a loss. It's not just sadness. It often includes feelings of shock, denial, disorientation, confusion, anger, fear, and panic. It can include regret and relief, physical pain and social discomfort, disjointed thinking, spiritual despair. It is physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual. That is so much more than sadness. And what I like to say is it's just whatever happens after death. It can be numbness. Maybe you're numb for 4 months. That's your grief. However we grieve, whatever the feelings that come up need to be okay. And we need to live in a culture that understands that. So I'm working with a woman right now in the UK who had a pregnancy loss, had a stillbirth, and she happened to go home right afterwards to be with her parents. And her mother, as you can imagine, is doing the Well, you just got to pull yourself up from your bootstraps thing. And, you know, you just got to stop thinking about him and everything's going to be okay. And this woman that I'm working with needs some time to be a puddle. She needs to be enraged. She's raged because there were some things that happened in the medical world that didn't need to happen, and maybe her baby would have been okay. So she's enraged, right? She's in spiritual despair. She's confused. She's genuinely doesn't know how to continue on her path. But she's being held in a container, especially during COVID, of her mom trying to tell her everything's going to be okay. And that's not what she needs right now. So we need to be in containers. We need to be in communities where people are like, no, actually, let's go dark. Let's trust that we can go super dark together, and you're not going to kill yourself. You're not going to like go crazy and never come back, but that I can walk with you down deep in the dark because I understand what grief is. And then slowly someday we'll come back out a different person. And that's Alan Woolfelt, for those of you who like to read. Alan Woolfelt is one of my favorite writers on being with grief, especially if you're someone who's interested in how you show up for your friends. His work on bereavement is essential. This is really exciting to me. I love nervous system work. I love learning about how the stress responses function in the body. And so basically, here's what we need to understand basically, is that your environment, right, is wherever you are, right? It's your home, it's the hospital, it's the grocery store, it's wherever you find yourself. Your nervous system reacts to your environment, right? I went through a phase of my life where I would have panic attacks if there were fluorescent lights. So like grocery stores or like going to Costco, I'd get like shaky in Costco. And I didn't realize how my nervous system was just being affected by these particular kind of lights. I'm better now. I've done a lot of herbs and things like that, so it's not an issue anymore. But we talk about it a lot in the home birth movement. Some people don't feel safe in hospitals when there's a perceived authority figure over top of them. So their nervous system closes up a little bit and they're affected by their environment. Okay, so the nervous system either perceives safety, danger, or a life threat, right? Feel safe, green zone. I can spontaneously engage with other people. We can make eye contact. I have facial expressions that show you that I'm at ease, okay? If I feel danger, I shut down a little bit more, right? I have a flight or flight. I'm ready to run, right? I'm kind of like, I'm in my head, I'm in my body, I'm in my head. Am I okay? Am I okay? I'm okay, right? This is danger, right? I'm checking with myself, I'm checking with my environment. When I'm safe, I can be in my body. When I'm not sure if I'm danger, I'm checking my environment, checking my body, checking my environment. You know, there's this, am I okay? It's hard to relax and be in our bodies when we're in danger, right? Our sphincters constrict, right? We can't breathe easily. We can't digest well when we're in danger. That's part of the fight or flight responses that our nervous system communicates, right? And if we sense a life threat, then we're really fighting, right? Then we get like aggressive, right? So what does this have to do with death, right? So this is a graphic that they use a lot in teaching like somatic experiencing therapy, right? It's a lot about what the body is learning. So if you are in an environment where you don't feel safe and you're processing a death, so maybe somebody's died and they're in the hospital and you're somebody who doesn't do authority well, you have a sense of danger. I'm not saying danger of your life, but just danger of your autonomy, danger of your sense of who you are being challenged. Any way that you might perceive like these people, I'm not just going to relax right now. It's a really hard space to be in and grieve, because like I talked about earlier, the grief happens in the body. If we can't relax into our body, we can't grieve. Same thing might happen in a funeral home. It's a little bit sterile in there sometimes. There's a perceived authority, right? The funeral home, it's not my house. I'm not in charge. So maybe I'm not in danger, but I have a little bit of that, like, I can't fully get into my body in this funeral home. Or there's a time, right? I'm in my stockings and my tie, not in my jammies. It's hard to have all of the body processes that move grief around the body when we're not feeling totally safe. And so that's one of the arguments for why we need to do this important grief work at home. And we've been doing this for a long, long time, right? So these are our ancient ancestors, and archaeology is changing, but what I like to hold on is this sort of idea that around the time that our ancient human ancestors changed from like our most distant animal relative to actually being the genetic manifestations of Homo sapiens sapiens, one of the leaps that we made was that they started to see that we were creating ceremony around death. And so my hypothesis, what I posit is that there's something really deeply encoded in our DNA, that what makes us human is participating in these rituals, right? And I love this image of those men carrying those rocks, because that really embodies for me the work that needs to be done. If that person that died was serving a vital function in that community, those people are going to have feelings of danger that that person is gone now. They're going to need to figure out who they are and how they're going to close that gap. And they need to do some physical work. There needs to be some pressure on their joints of the new reality as they offer their services to their community and really deal with that burial. It's a ritual. It's a ritual. Making beauty is part of the healing. And these are pictures from Iconi up at White Eagle Conservation Burial Grounds. But fortunately for us, I've had these pictures for many, many years. And the woman in these pictures, for those of you may or may not know, is Jade Scherer, who now lives in town here. And we've become great friends. But she was many years ago part of starting the White Eagle Conservation Burial Grounds in Washington State. But now she's our good friend. So I've been using these stock pictures since before then. So anyway, this is what they do at White Eagle, is they make mandalas out of earth in the ground and then put, so they're surrounding beauty in the death process. And the act of making the beauty actually works in your brain. So we're talking about the nervous system. Death can be ugly, but when we make death next to the ugly thing, we're filing these two images together. And so our experience of the death doesn't have to be only ugly or only hard. It's like it's ugly and it's tempered with beauty, right? I would never teach this class to say, if you just do your work, death is beautiful. Death is wonderful. Oh, it can be so groovy. That's not the case. But you can mix some groovy in. You can mix some beauty in. You can mix some, oh, I have meaning. I have purpose. I have community in with this horrible, challenging thing that has happened, and it sort of titrates the trauma of it so that it gives us room to grow. It gives us a space to grow from. The mark of a good death is that it is a village-making event. Death is not a mistake. It's not something the world shouldn't have. It serves a purpose, and it brings people together when it is done right. So I've talked a little bit about the purpose that it serves, right? About helping us cope with our own death when we get to see it. It makes room. If nobody died, right, there'd be no room for young people to come along. There'd be no life, literally, in the soil if there wasn't also death, right? So the way that we meet it, though, is what really populates our communities with meaningful experiences and makes our where we live a village, where we need each other. And then this is just my little bit of humor. A friend is someone who will help you move, but a real friend is someone who will help you move a body. Here are just some statistics for you. Okay, we're doing good, doing good. So these are just some environmental impacts. So I talked about the environmental impact of the conventional funeral industry right now. 4.3 million gallons of embalming fluid are buried each year in the United States alone. And that's, I believe, the size of 8 Olympic-sized swimming pools of embalming fluid, toxic embalming fluids, including formaldehyde, that are just poured into the soil or burned into the atmosphere for no reason. There's no medical reason to embalm a body. 64,500 tons of steel for caskets and vaults are just buried every year, just for that hour or two at the funeral, to make the person look more loved because you bought an expensive casket. 17,000 tons of bronze and copper, which are used for embellishments on those caskets. These are all things that are buried each year in the 22,500 cemeteries that are registered in the United States. 1.6 million tons of reinforced concrete, and those are just to make vaults so that there's no divots. It makes it basically, that's to make it easier to mow the lawn. And those of you who are aware of the environmental issues around the concrete plants, that's a big deal. That's enough concrete every year to build a 2-lane highway between San Francisco and Kansas City, buried every year for cosmetic purposes. And 2 million board feet of lumber, including hardwoods from the rainforest, are used to make high-end caskets every year. So there's a huge environmental impact associated with the conventional funeral practices in this country. Cremation is not any better. So it requires fuel to burn 3 to 5 hours, depending on the size of the body, at 1,500 degrees. That's enough fossil fuels to drive across the country 3 times per body. It releases hydrogen chloride from burnings of plastics in the body bag, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and trace minerals, including mercury. And that's depending on, like if someone has like a false hip or, has had dental work and things like that. All of those toxic metals get released into the atmosphere. Each body produces 250 pounds of carbon dioxide that end up in our atmosphere, greenhouse gases. Real quickly, I'll just talk about green burial. Green burial is a situation where only unembalmed bodies are buried. The containers are all biodegradable. There's no vault, so nothing extra ends up in the ground. And certain places, like what I told you about up in Washington State, involve land restoration and conservation. So you can do something called a conservation easement in your green burial grounds that shows that you're actually doing work to restore the ecosystem that it's a part of. These are some ideas for some natural ways to bury body. My favorite is the one in the field there. That's a felted wool casket, and you can see it's got handles around the sides for people to carry it. I believe that this tall blue one here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, is also made out of a felted wool. This one's cardboard that's been lined with like some cray paper. And then the acorn is an urn that was felted, woven basket. So there's lots of beautiful ways to use art to take care of the body. And then these are some shroud burials, which are also very beautiful. Some funeral homes won't allow you to just bury a body in a shroud. If they're owned by, again, the funeral home owns the cemetery. So it doesn't matter that there's no laws. They put it off as if it's the law. It's required that you have a casket. It's required in their cemetery that you have a casket. It's not required by law. So you need to be doing your homework. Is there a cemetery near you that will honor your wishes? And of course, one of the dreams of Arizona Community Deathcare is to start a beautiful green burial grounds in town. So everybody keep it in mind that if you hear of land, especially land trust land that could be a conservation burial grounds, we have people with interest with money and things like that, looking to help make that project happen here in northern Arizona, so that we all have access to a privately owned community green burial grounds. Here's some great ways to transport the body. And like I said, it's not just oovy groovy hippie types that do this. Military families participate in this, religious folks participate in this. This is really for everybody. This is a human experience. This is not a cultural revolution. This is not some new trendy thing that's going on. This is really an old call. This is our oldest impulse. It's like fire and death, right? We made fire as like one of our first human impulses, and we cared for our dead as one of our first human impulses. And here's just some other pictures from green burial grounds and families working together to do this work on their own. A lot of times in green burial grounds, they don't use conventional headstones, but they'll use markers or like little GPS plates and stuff like that in the ground, because really the idea is to let the land be more in its natural state. That's our friend Jody, making beauty on top of the body. The family can really, participate in all that. All of those images of beauty that get filed away, with the death, just make such a big impact. This is a fairly new natural burial ground in New Mexico. Another great image is of the kids making beauty. This is our statement from Arizona Community Deathcare, and then we're pretty much at the end here, and I'll take time for questions. So what is community deathcare? This is what's so important to me. It comes from a belief that our culture is missing out on deep experiences of meaning when we walk blindly and uninformed into times of tragedy, life-changing diagnosis, caregiving, death, and grief. We are a group of local volunteers, educators, healthcare workers, and curious humans dedicated to making a difference in the lives of our neighbors, friends, and community members. We offer informational classes such as this one, facilitated conversations like Death Cafe, and advocacy and policy consulting for hospitals and care homes. So like I said, we've worked with the ethics board at YRMC to try to get their policies to be a little bit more in line with the laws. We offer step-by-step guidance for families curious about caring for their own loved ones after death, whether for emotional, spiritual, financial, or environmental reasons. Arizona Community Deathcare is a resource for anyone thinking about facing end of life. So that's what we're here for. We're here, if someone is facing end of life and you want to have a home funeral, but you kind of just want somebody there who's been in that realm before, or even I just did 2 yesterday over the phone. People who knew about this work, had attended my classes, felt totally empowered to do it on their own, which is what we want. This is about families doing the work, not just me to do it instead of some other funeral director. I'm not a funeral director. It's not about me doing it. I can hold your hand while you take care of your family member, but it's about the empowerment to feel like you can do this on your own. So I had 2 friends yesterday caring for their loved ones at home who had died separate. One was in New Mexico, one was in Phoenix, calling me, how do we get her mouth closed? She died and her mouth's hanging open. And I know that you said there was a way. Can you remind me how to do it? And so I'm on the phone sending pictures of myself with scarves and showing them sending little videos of how to roll the towel and stick it up under their chin. And then they set the features, and it's totally doable. So that's what community death care is about. This isn't about me replacing a funeral industry. This is about community education so that everybody feels empowered to do this important work on their own. And this is from a workshop that I taught. Really, it's about everybody's hands coming together. And this is how you find me. So I'm Dani at homefuneralalliance.org. Our website is arizonacommunitydeathcare.org, or excuse me, I always say Arizona, but it's important. It's azcommunitydeathcare.org. All of the links to all of the state statutes are on there. There's information if you wanted to take care of a body of a loved one who died tomorrow. You could find the resources on our website, step-by-step, how to do that. Also, you could find our contact information and I will walk you through it, or just be there to be on the phone, or run over and help you if you're here in Prescott. But the point is that this website is chock full of resources and information. There's death doulas. If you want to find a death doula, we have community resources, therapists in town that are great with grief, body workers who are really good at moving grief through the body and things like that. So a great resource that we've created for our hometown. And I think that's it. So that's the end of my presentation. This is meant to be an overview of home funerals to sort of get you curious. There's so much more to talk about. I could teach this for hours and hours and hours, and we could go so deep. But I hope that what you've taken away from this is like a, whoa, I didn't know that was possible. And now I feel a little bit empowered with that information. So anyway, with that said, I'm stopped sharing my screen, and I just want to hear from you. Is there anything you want to know more about? Anything that you want me to clarify? Go for it. Go ahead, Susan.
I just was wondering if that website, if there are videos like the one you just did there, that would be a good start for people, and then including all the resources, and then they could know who to reach out for.
That's great. So there are resources on there. If you're looking for videos, I would go to the NHFA YouTube channel. So the National Home Funeral Alliance has a YouTube channel, and there are so many videos, talks like this, body care demonstrations, you name it. It's chock full of information. So it's National Home Funeral Alliance. And just if you search that on YouTube, you'll find tons of talks and lots of me rambling, and I interview lots of people on there and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a great question, Susan. Thank you.
Okay,
I think it was just really good to know that the law is not always the law. You know, it's just like you say, it's an assumption, and that there are more possibilities here in this state, although I know it's state by state, but there are more possibilities. That's good.
Yeah, there really are. And, you know, having a little bit of legal language in your pocket. So I do a lot of work with the Funeral Consumers Alliance. And one of the things that they say is that there's this legal term, entering a contract under duress. And basically what happens is if a hospital will not release the body to you, because as I said earlier, what you're getting into is property law. That's what they're messing with. Basically, once that person has died, the next of kin is the legal owner of that thing, of that piece of property. The body is property, and the hospital is holding that body hostage by not releasing it to its rightful owner. And then they're going the next step and saying the only way that you can have this body is if you pay this funeral director. So they are making you enter a commercial contract under duress. And you say, I feel like you're making me enter a commercial contract under duress. Could you call your lawyer and check in with that and make sure that that's okay? Because my understanding is it's my right not to be forced into a commercial contract under duress. And you'll oftentimes get a phone call back within, you know, just a few minutes letting you have what you want. Because you know that legal term. And, you know, like I said, in town, I'm the president of the National Home Funeral Alliance, so I often will call hospital administrators to advocate for families. So you're always welcome to call me in that kind of a situation. What else?
Well, I was one to say too that I didn't realize the environmental impact of cremation. That is really important information to get out there, because you think if you skip all the stuff that you know has been commercialized and it's cheaper and it's this, but that's a big impact.
It's a big impact. But if we don't have green burial options in town, then we're kind of sunk. So this is so much about increasing our access to our legal options, right? We can be put in the ground with nothing or with a sheet over us. And for a lot of people that understand that that's actually, for the earth, the best way to be put to the ground. All the microbes can get at you faster and turn you back into soil and feed the planet. But if we don't have access to that, because all of our local cemeteries want us to be in vaults and in expensive caskets and embalmed or whatever, then we're not getting access to the things that are our rights.
What about transporting people over state lines?
Yep, so it's not as hard as you think. You just need to, it's paperwork. So if you want to go from like Arizona to California, say, you contact Vital Records and you contact the Vital Records in California and you get a special transit permit. Yep. And again, that's one of those things where depending on what your purpose is, like if it's more about my heart work, then I might call a funeral director, a friendly funeral director who understands what I'm doing. Am I right? And say, hey, can you fill out this paperwork for me? And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Sometimes though, you call a funeral home and they're like, well, you can't do that yourself because they're uninformed. You can't do that yourself. I had the head of the Arizona Funeral Board, which is basically the main person who regulates all the licensed funeral directors in Arizona, try to tell me that it's illegal for a family to see an unembalmed body. I was on the phone with her at her office in the Capitol. And I'm like, really? Could you get me the number of that statute? Because I've been doing this work a long time and I've never heard that a family can't see an unembalmed body. And she like put me on hold for 5 minutes, and she came back. She's like, yeah, I guess I'm wrong about that because I can't find that statute anywhere. And I was like, you're right. Actually, let me show you, you know, this statute and the Federal Trade Commission funeral rule that says that you cannot require embalming at all and that families own their bodies. And she's like, yeah, of course I should have known that. But her first response is, you can't do that. So we need to be educating our funeral directors as well, so that we can call them and say, hey, I drive a smart car. Could you pick my husband's body up from the hospital for me and drop it off at my house real quick? Thanks. And they're not like, well, you can't do that. What's your plan? Blah, blah, blah. They're like, I don't even have to ask you any questions. I'll send you the bill. That's it. Or you want to go across state lines? Here's the paperwork. No problem. We have to educate our funeral directors also. And there's a few in town who are warming up to all these ideas. We're doing that work.
That's good stuff.
Where can a body be buried?
So if you are in the county, not within the incorporated city limits, you technically can bury a body in your backyard. You have to go through like a planning and zoning process that takes about 30 days. And so you have to be able to be within setbacks. So you have to be like 10 feet from a fence and 10 feet from like a septic system or a well. And as long as you can do that, technically you can bury a body in your yard. You have to send letters to all of the neighbors within like, I can't remember that, like 100 yards of your fence line. They get a letter saying that you're going to do that, and they can respond. Just because they say they don't want you to do it doesn't mean you get denied. They would have to have a really good reason why they think you shouldn't be allowed to do it, which there aren't many for funerals. It's not like it's going to be like loud because there's parties, you know, or whatever. Like they don't want a bar going in.
So there's no like a water pollution issue or anything like that.
Right.
Okay.
There might be a thing like if you're in a floodplain, they might want to know what you're doing about that, or certain things like that. But it's not hard. And so you can actually, I'm working with a family out in Williamson Valley right now, and you can actually designate a family cemetery before anybody's even dead. You just you go through this paperwork process. And I highly recommend doing it because it's at least a 30-day process, because there's a 30-day comment period for your neighbors.
Yeah, and obviously the body's not going to keep for 30 days. So. Right.
Well, I actually helped a guy once who bought a 6-foot deep freezer and stored his mother in the deep freezer waiting for, because she had a plot at Arlington Cemetery. And he was like, I am not paying a funeral director to hold my mom's body for 4 months. So we helped him, and it was totally legal. And he kept her body in a deep freezer. He had to just be in contact with the vital records office and just let him know everything was still fine. And then at the end of the time, he buried her body at Arlington. So you could do it, but why not do it now? So if you have land and you know that's what you want to do, let's go through the process of getting your family cemetery. I think you have to have like a 3-foot fence around it, and you have to submit like a little survey marking off the spots. But it's very, very, I was surprised when I met with the county folks, and they walked me through the process of how really easy it is to have a backyard burial.
Who do you contact to start that process if you were interested?
Yeah, so it is.
Is it on the website?
You can find it on the website, on the county website. And I believe it's also on the Arizona Community Deathcare website. And if you can't find it, send me an email. And I like don't want to leave the screen. I have all the paperwork right over there at my other desk. But it's basically like the planning and zoning people.
Okay.
Special use, it might be something like that.
I'm concerned about California's laws, because that's our family homestead there. We've made into a conservancy. My brother still owns a piece right in front of it. So I was just wondering if that website we're talking about would have a place that talked about the laws in different states that you have to, because you said in New York you can't do this.
Yeah.
And
California is actually really easy. I don't know specifically about the burial laws, but I'm sure that if you have a big piece of land, that you can create a family burial grounds there, and they have no restrictions as far as families taking care of. There's nothing, you do not have to hire a funeral director in California.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I just have to talk them into doing it and doing the transporting. But I think
Yep. Use the podcast.
Mhm.
Have them listen to episodes of that Path Home podcast. It's really impactful when skeptical people hear normal people telling their stories about the difference that it made.
Yeah, well, the environmental impact, that's the one that's going to persuade
Yeah,
them.
that's amazing. That was amazing to learn. I always thought cremation was a clean way of disposing of the body. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
No, it
You know,
isn't,
there's
yeah.
a place up in Crestone, Colorado, where they do outdoor cremations. And just for the perspective, I don't know if you're familiar with firewood very much, but for each body, they use 3 cords of wood.
Oh boy.
And I can't remember what the dimensions are of a cord of wood, but like 3 cords of wood, like my family, we don't have, oh here, this is probably my husband. How big is a cord of wood? What are the dimensions of a cord of wood? You walked in at the perfect moment. 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet is a cord. That 3
of those.
times is what it takes to burn one body. That's a lot of resources. It's like we all need our own Viking ship, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought, oh, burial, it takes up land, and you know, and it's kind of, then if people want to come say their goodbyes, of course, if they've handled the body and done the goodbying that way, it works great. I just thought it was not very practical, but now I'm getting a totally different perspective.
Yeah, you go right back to the earth. And
Back to the earth.
so it's
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd always thought that burial, because I was thinking of casket and the formal, you know, cemetery, and I thought, oh, it's just so artificial. It's not related to our lives. But now it's interesting. It's been really informative.
yeah, I've always wondered, how can I get myself in a position where I could just me and the earth, just, and whatever animals that are around and bugs, but you've answered those questions. Just
Wonderful.
a little pre-work here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for being such a great audience and listening and asking such great questions. This is always so much fun for me. Please do check out our website. There's a spot on our website where you can join our mailing list. We don't hardly send out very much, but when we have different talks and things like that, you'll get, you know, little newsletters and things. So when you go to the azcommunitydeathcare.org website, you can join our mailing list and just keep up with the things that we're doing. I'm teaching an online workshop about holding space for pregnancy loss that's really geared towards healthcare providers, hospice workers, doctors and nurses and whatnot in October. So that'll be going around there. There's CEUs.
I have a question about that, because I have a friend and also a family member who both had pregnancy losses.
Yeah.
And it's just taking them ages to integrate that loss in some way that, I don't know, feels, you know, loss is part of life, but I'm wondering, is there any benefit in learning about this stuff after the fact?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think there really is. You know, we do, one of my curiosities is around something called ambiguous loss, right? So it's like maybe the person died and you never get the body, or you never really, or they were kidnapped and you never really know if they're gone. Right. There's this idea of ambiguous loss, which is like the antithesis of everything that we've been talking about.
Right.
And a lot of times losing a baby, especially in a pregnancy loss, can be that sort of thing, because it's like you loved this person, but you didn't really know them, but you have this deep love and now they're gone. And it's just a very intangible way to grieve and mourn, because you never got to know them. And so, you know, we do a lot of somatic work of just like, what would it be like to wrap something that was the weight of the baby and carry it around in a baby carrier and really feel that weight, because you got to go to the deep downs, right? You got to go into the dark place. And when it's that abstract, sometimes it's really hard to feel it. and
Yeah.
to move it through completely. So, yeah, playing a lot around with some theater, some ritual theater can be very helpful.
And
Okay.
this, and if you find someone who needs this in the next, I don't know, few months, we're going to have this presentation on the YouTube channel, on the Peregrine YouTube.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah,
That's
so
great.
it'll be available.
That's
Right.
terrific. Yeah, I mean, it was very informative. We went through a family funeral almost a decade ago when my daughter-in-law died, and she wasn't prepared to, because she was young, she was 31, she wasn't prepared to acknowledge that her death was imminent, so there was no planning. And we went to Jerry Lyons in
Jerry Grace.
California.
Yep, she's a teacher of mine for sure.
Yeah, so she guided us through it, and it was amazingly meaningful. It's such important work. Anyway,
We're going to end
okay.
time now, just because I only had this set for 90 minutes, and we've
No
gone over.
problem.
And so it's wonderful that, yeah, it hasn't kicked us off. Yay.
Yeah. Well, feel
No,
free
but
to
this
reach
is
out if
very
you have more
valuable.
questions.
Okay,
Great.
great.
Thanks
Okay,
so much.
thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
Oh, Dani, thank you for doing this. This was wonderful.
Yeah, it was really
Wonderful.
terrific.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night,
Okay,
everyone.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.